Hi, I'm Jake Newton with CPPS, and today I want to share a little bit of information specifically for healthcare in regards to standards that are out there for workplace violence prevention program development. Healthcare is one of the highest risk industries for violence in the workplace. It's getting considerable traction in terms of information and guidance that's out there that is really driving what needs to be in place. We just had the Joint Commission go live with some of their new standards in January, which I'm going to talk about. But it's getting to the point where we even have state legislation and now federal legislation that is starting to work its way through. California published theirs several years ago, obviously, but now the federal government is also looking at legislation and may potentially pass that in the near to not too distant future. So let's start with the Joint Commission. Talk a little bit about their new standards since they just had some new ones come out or go live in January. We'll talk a little bit about the DNV and their standards, and then we'll also talk about different documents that are out there that can help you build this program and benchmark to as a means to help fulfill some of those requirements, whether by the Joint Commission or the DNV. So with the Joint Commission, they kind of have the overarching stance that a hospital must manage their safety and security risks. One of those is obviously workplace violence. So in part of their new requirements, they require an annual analysis of the program. In other words, an assessment. So they want to have that annual emphasis, that annual looking into the actual program and make sure that it is being refreshed and looked at on a regular basis to ensure that these risks are being taken care of to the extent that they can. It also talks a little bit about monitoring, reporting, and investigating workplace violence incidents. So there's various ways. There's going to be several components that help meet this, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But there's several moving parts there. So we need to investigate reports that are made. We need to have reporting mechanisms in place. And plus, we need to be monitoring different potential cases as they occur. Another new one that just recently came out is in regards to training. And so we'll talk about training specifically in a moment again, but they actually go into considerable detail. They talk about several topics ranging from roles and responsibilities at different layers in the organization. What is workplace violence? It has de-escalation considerations that need to be fulfilled. So there's several layers of training that need to be done. And then another big one for the Joint Commission is that they also now require that the program be led by an individual but developed with a multidisciplinary involvement. Several stakeholders need to be part of this process. And we'll talk about a document in a second as well that kind of shapes what that looks like. But effectively, it's generally security, it's HR, legal, maybe the head of nursing, whatever it might be. But we need to get that multidisciplinary involvement going. So as part of that team that builds out this program, it talks about building out a policy for prevention and response for violence. It talks about the reporting procedures that need to occur. And then it's also got the assistance for if something does happen, assistance that needs to be in place for the victims and for witnesses affected. The DNV is a little bit more succinct in the standards that they establish, but it basically says develop a written comprehensive plan or program rather for workplace violence prevention and intervention that is consistent with OSHA publication 3148-04R. We'll talk about that document in a minute, but basically OSHA has a couple of documents that they've published specifically for workplace violence. And then I also want to introduce a third document, which is an American national standard published by Asis International. And it has actually been vetted through the American National Standard process. But these three documents, you've got OSHA publication 3148. You've also got OSHA instruction 0201-058, published in 2017, and then the ANSI standard. So with the OSHA publication, that document is basically specific for healthcare and social service workers. It goes into great detail about what needs to be included in a program. And that's primarily what the DNV says you need to build from for that actual program, for your workplace violence prevention program. The OSHA instruction is enforcement procedures and scheduling for workplace violence incidents, otherwise known as inspection procedures if OSHA is going to be coming on site and investigating potential violence. It also uses a lot of the vernacular and information from the other OSHA publication, 3148. And so they speak to each other. They're very consistent with each other. But when OSHA is coming on site, those are their procedures that they're going to be going through. The third document is the ASIS International American National Standard for Workplace Violence and Active Assailant Prevention, Intervention, and Response. And that was just published in 2020. It was originally published in 2011, but just recently published in 2020. So what does all of this mean? So we've got the Joint Commission, we've got the DNV, they've got the requirements. You have to meet those to get your funding and everything else, of course. But what are these other documents? Well, they're great benchmarks to help you build out your program. And generally what they all codify, if you kind of synthesize them, if you put them all together, here's a little bit of an overview of what a program, a comprehensive violence prevention program looks like. Starts off with an assessment. Look at your entire program. What do you have in place? What don't you have in place? Identify gaps and determine what needs your program has. And of course, those documents have a lot of resources in there for you to kind of look and see, well, what exactly do I need in my program? The second thing they talk about is having a policy. So a workplace violence prevention and intervention policy. The ANSI standard, for example, talks about taking a no threats, no violence stance against violence in the workplace. And this is also where you're going to have to build in your reporting processes or procedures for individuals to be able to report under the policy and report potential incidents of violence or concerning behavior. It also talks about, all of these documents also talk about that multidisciplinary involvement that I talked about. Oftentimes, this is going to look like what is known as a threat management team. So a threat management team is security, it's legal, it's HR, maybe EAP, maybe the head of facilities, and the head of nursing, all sorts of different multidisciplinary or cross-functional individuals that would basically, are not cross-functional individuals, but basically different stakeholders from different functions rather within the organization that can come together and actually build out this program. The second part of this is actually managing the threats, the incident management as that occurs. That's what this program or this team is largely going to be responsible for. And then there's also in some documents that say you need that external reach. Reach out for that added expertise for things like behavioral threat assessment to mitigate behaviors of concern, to actually respond to threats as they occur, talk about intervention strategies and those sorts of things. The next thing it talks about is specifically an incident management process, formalizing that so that you can have a process that is proactive and works on the prevention of violence, but also has a process in place for imminent emergencies. The next big category would be training. So training would be layered throughout the organization. So the ANSI standard and OSHA both talk about training for employees. It talks about training for managers and supervisors, training for the threat management team, training for senior leadership throughout in the organization. It's layered throughout the organization, and many times it also even talks about what training each of those needs. As you can imagine, it's about workplace violence facts, the warning signs, how to report these things, domestic violence considerations and their impact on the workplace, response to emergencies like an active assailant. It goes into all of those details. The other big component it talks about, these documents talk about, is you need to have a record-keeping process to be able to maintain records associated with reports made under the policy, and for ongoing threats, having a place that is secure to be able to pull those things up if they happen to reoccur in the future, or you need to have a management process in place for ongoing threats. The last thing is some peripheral prevention issues that include things like physical security, developing a culture that is a strong culture of professionalism, employee screening techniques, and some other things like that. But if you're looking for a core program, these are many of the things that you want to include, and that's generally what all of these documents say that you need to have in place. And by doing so, you're going to be well on your way, if not into a comprehensive program that either meets the Joint Commission requirements or the DNV standards. So hopefully you find this helpful. If you have any questions, certainly feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear what some of your challenges have been in terms of actually implementing your program within your hospital or healthcare system. But thank you for watching, and look forward to more.